Hey YouTube, Ed here with Jack of all trades and welcome to another video. So what we're going to talk about today is the Winchester Model 1894 lever action repeating rifle. So let's get right into the video. And welcome back. So yes, the subject of today's video is going to be the Winchester 1894, or also known as the Model 94 lever action repeating rifle. But before we get into that video, please do me the solid of going down, hitting that like and subscribe button. Make sure you ring that notification bell so you get notified of upcoming videos. And if you like what you're seeing here on the Jack of all trades channel, I sure would appreciate it if you let me know in those comments, and I will do more videos like this. All right, so the Winchester Model 94, also known as the Winchester Model 1894, probably the most well-known rifle ever made, at least in America, that is. You go to any deer camp, everybody in deer camp has either owned, held, shot, or killed a deer with a Model 94 Winchester. Quite likely, it was possibly their first deer gun. I know it was my first deer gun. I know it was my brother's first deer gun. And subsequently enough, this rifle was also my grandpa's first deer gun. But I digress. It's quite possibly the most famous rifle, right up there with the Winchester 73 or 1873 rifle. Is probably one of the most well-known rifles ever built. And it's kind of become synonymous with the 30-30 Winchester centerfire rifle cartridge. Typically, when most people think of 30-30 Winchester cartridges, they think of either the Model 94 Winchester or the Marlin 336. Those two guns kind of go hand in hand with the Winchester 30-30 rifle cartridge. Oddly enough, there will be a video coming up on the Marlin 336. Again, let me know in those comments if that's a video that you're interested in seeing. So let's talk a little bit about the Winchester Model 94. Now, this is actually a family heirloom rifle. This rifle has been in the family for 75 years, since it was new. It was made in 1950, and it was purchased by my father in 1951 at the base exchange at Lackland Air Force Base, when my father came home from the Korean War and was discharged out of the Air Force. And he actually bought this rifle for my grandfather. Uh, it was actually my grandfather's first deer rifle, and he had hunted deer with a 16 gauge shotgun for almost all of his deer hunting career. And that was the gun that he typically used to deer hunt with. And then my father came home with this rifle and gifted it to him. I believe the story goes, as my father tells it, it was $48 for the rifle, the case, a couple of boxes of shells, and a cleaning kit. And so this rifle has been in my family ever since. When my grandfather died, it obviously went to my father, and now my brother owns it, and it goes to him and his family. So it is a family heirloom piece. Fun story about this rifle: the one of the deer seasons, my grandfather took this rifle. He went on a Canadian whitetail deer hunt. Got a really nice buck. It was a one shot kind of deal. He fired one shot, the deer went right down. He was using native guides, and he actually had to go get his brother because the deer was so big they didn't want to drag it out with just themselves. And it was snowing that day, and when my grandfather got back to camp, he dried the gun off, and then he leaned it up against the wall of the wall tent right next to the wood stove to dry it off. The problem was it got a little too close to the wood stove, and it was left there just a little bit too long. And you may or may not be able to see it, but right here on the stock, there's some discoloration. Now, over the years, that discoloration has faded due to cleaning and things of that effect and re-oiling, but it actually scorched the stock a little bit and discolored it. And the story goes that my grandfather was terribly upset with himself for letting that happen, and he had a very hard time telling my dad that he had scorched the wood on the stock during his hunting trip, and he just felt absolutely terrible. And my dad, being the kind of guy that he was, he said, I bought you that gun to use. Marks, scars, burns, they all carry a story, and that gun just has a story to go along with it now. And that was the end of it. It was never brought up again. Anyway, kind of a fun story. So yes, this is a family heirloom piece. It's a 100% original condition pre-64, right down to the missing hood sight, which was actually a problem that the Model 94 rifles had, as those hood sights oftentimes did come up missing, either because guys didn't like it and they took it off and they didn't know where they put it, or they would get snagged on a stick or a piece of brush or something and they would fall off in the woods and never be found again. And that was one of the very few issues with this gun, is that hood sight always came up missing. So let's talk about a little bit of history about the Winchester Model 1894. It was introduced in obviously 1894, and there's been some changes through over the course of the years, but they are still producing this rifle today. The very ironic thing about it is collectors really look for pre-64 rifles like this, and you can actually pay the same amount of money for a pre-64 Winchester Model 94 rifle as you can for a new one is selling today. And even more so, the new ones are exceedingly expensive. Winchester makes one, I believe they call it the Sporter Deluxe, sells for about $2,300, and it's a color case hardened rifle. It's a beautiful gun, but wow, expensive. Prices have obviously gone up. Now, this rifle was preceded by four other models of rifle. The 1866, Winchester 1866 lever action rifle, which was a descendant of the Henry rifle. Looked very much like it, right down to the brass, hardened brass receiver. The model 1873, which is widely known as the gun that won the West. There was about 720,000 of those rifles were made. The model 1876, which never gained a whole lot of popularity. The rumor is that it was too heavy, and a lot of people who bought that rifle just didn't really like it, and so it never really gained a lot of traction. And then the model 1892 was the one right before the 94, and that one's actually pretty well known as well, and that was made by some unknown guy. What was his name? John Browning. That's right. He actually designed the 1892, and that's actually a rifle design that's still copied today. Companies like Rossi and a whole bunch of other companies are actually copying the 1892 platform and kind of keeping that lever action design alive. And then after the 1892 came our beloved 1894, which is also just simply known as the Model 94. And this gun was also a design inspiration of John Browning. It was originally chambered to fire black powder cartridges, which were 3240 and 3855 Winchester. And then in 1894, when this gun started to be produced, they also were using 4440 steel to build these guns. And then in 1895, they started producing this rifle out of nickel steel, which was far superior to the 4440 steel. And that dramatically improved the strength of the rifle, and therefore you could fire high-powered cartridges out of it that use smokeless powder. Rifle cartridges like the 25-35 and quite obviously the 30-30 Winchester, which were much higher pressure loads. So the Winchester Model 94 is widely considered to be the standard when you're talking about 30-30 Winchester ammunition. And the Model 94 is by far and away the most popular rifle of its time. And it is the first rifle to actually sell 7 million units, or 7 million rifles. And like I said earlier, when you talk about 30-30 ammunition, people picture typically one of two guns in their head, either the 336 Marlin or the Model 94 Winchester. Little interesting facts about this gun. The number 1 millionth Model 94 Winchester was actually gifted to Calvin Coolidge in 1927. And then in 1948, Harry Truman received number 1,500,000. And then in 1953, Dwight D. Eisenhower received number 2 million. So you Model 94 Winchester owners out there, you're in good company if you own one of these rifles. So as I stated earlier, the Model 94 was actually born in 1894 and was in solid production for many, many years. And then in 1963, the CEO of the Olin Corp, which was John Olin, he retired. And the Olin Corp owned Winchester at the time. And in 1964, the new executive board of the Olin Corporation decided they were going to start cutting costs on a focus on increased profitability. And though at the time the Olin Corp was more interested in chemical production, they still owned the Winchester company, and they were bound and determined to try to cut manufacturing costs on the Winchester rifles. And these cuts were inclusive of many things, but probably the most important is when they made these guns after 1964, they went to a process called sintered steel. And if you don't know what sintered steel is, sintering is the process where you take steel particles or steel chunks and you heat them up very, very hot, but not to the point of melting. And then you compress them in a mold and you actually form it to the shape that you want. It's a good process. It's a strong process, and it's obviously far cheaper than machining the receivers out of a solid billet steel blank, which is actually steel that has been melted down into a liquid form, formed into a block, and then they put it into a machining center and they would machine it to make the rifle. Uh, but it was a much more cost effective way, but also it made the rifle less strong and the receivers weren't as good. Then they would do other things like they would stamp parts out of sheet metal steel instead of machining them out of solid steel. They did things like they would take away the solid roll or solid pins and they would replace them with hollowed roll pins, things of that effect. Any way that the Olin Corp could cut costs in production, they kind of started doing it after 1964. And that's why after 1964, these rifles kind of lost a little bit of their reputation. And it wasn't just the Model 94, it was pretty much anything that Winchester made, the Model 100, the Model 88, the Model 70, all of those guns, if they were post 64, they weren't nearly as desirable as pre 64 rifles. So after 1964, when Winchester rifles kind of started losing some of their desirability, in 1989, along came a company called FN Herstal, and they purchased the Winchester company from U.S. Repeating Arms. And in 1992, FN decided that they were going to start to focus on improving the quality of Winchester rifles overall and across all models. So for the Model 94, that means that they started going back to machining receivers out of solid billet steel. They went back to using solid pins instead of rolled pins. They brought a lot of those quality problems that they had in the mid to late 60s all the way through 88, the upper 80s and early 90s, and they started to correct all those problems with Huwell. And that actually brought a lot of faithful Winchester owners back into the fold. Additionally, what they did at that point in time was they added a button safety to these rifles. Now, this rifle being a pre 64 doesn't have it, but that button safety, which is often referred to as a lawyer button, uh, allowed Winchester to start selling the Winchester Model 94 globally. A lot of countries wouldn't allow the gun to be imported because it didn't have any form of an external safety. The safety on this gun is quite literally the half cock position. That is the safety. That's all you get. But other countries actually wanted a physical cross block style safety on it. And so FN appeased them by adding that to the rifle. And though all these improvements were long sought after and it did improve the quality of the rifle, the cross block safety actually wasn't very well received in the US. A lot of guys really just didn't like the cross block safety. So then in 2003, the cross block safety was actually removed, and then they moved the safety back here onto the Tang, which gained a little more popularity because it's a little more intuitive. It was a little easier to reach, and it wasn't quite so out of the way. It was just a flick of the thumb, and the safety was disengaged, and you could shoot the rifle. Then in 2006, Browning Company or Browning Arms was actually licensed to produce Winchester rifles and shotguns. And so manufacturing of the Winchester Model 94 was actually moved to the Moroku Company in Japan in 2010. And then these guns were imported back into the United States by Browning Arms. So the Winchester Model 94 is also kind of synonymous with commemorative rifles. If you think commemorative rifle, oftentimes the Model 94 was used as the basis or the base rifle for that commemorative. Lots of famous people had Winchester Model 94 commemoratives that were produced for them. John Wayne, Buffalo Bill Cody, Bat Masterson, Theodore Roosevelt, Crazy Horse, the Texas Rangers, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, even the Boy Scouts had a commemorative Model 94 Winchester. And if you could think of a celebration, there was probably a commemorative Winchester Model 94 celebration rifle, like the Texas Lone Star. I believe it was the Texas Lone Star commemorative rifle that was celebrating one of the anniversaries that Texas became a state. I saw one on Gunbroker. It was the Saskatchewan Commemorative Jubilee Winchester Model 94. If you can think of a celebration, there was probably a Model 94 commemorative made for it. At the end of the day, you don't have to look hard to find a Winchester Model 94 commemorative, but you do have to pay a premium for it. Uh, Commemorative rifles, as soon as they were minted, were instantaneously labeled as collectible. And it really doesn't matter what the commemoration was, it was automatically just a collectible rifle. I found a Model 94 that was a commemorative, and it was paired with a Colt single action revolver in, I want to say it was Winchester 4440, and it was a match set. They had matching serial numbers between the gun and the revolver. It had a really nice display case. They were brand new. They were unfired, and for a mere $25,000, you could own that set. And that was actually listed on Gunbroker not too long ago. So the commemoratives were highly collectible. And that brings us into our next topic, was the collectability of the Model 94 Winchester. Now, steadfast collectors of the Model 94 look for several things when they're trying to purchase one of these things. And the first is, quite obviously, is it a commemorative or not? Any commemorative rifle fetches a premium and are grabbed up pretty quickly to die-hard steadfast collectors if they don't already have one. These were limited production rifles, and the moment that they came out of the factory, they were instantly considered collectible. The other thing that collectors oftentimes look for is the pre-64. And these models are somewhat of the gold standard of the Winchester Model 94 collectors. And certainly people who collect any Winchester gun, one of the things that they almost always ask right out of the gate is it a pre-64? All right, so when you're buying a Winchester Model 94, how do you tell if it's a pre-64? Well, there's a few ways you can do it, and the most reliable way to do it is to just simply look up the serial number. And I will put the link to a website down below in the description. And everybody's got a smartphone in their hands these days, so it doesn't matter where you are, if you're in a gun shop or a gun show or wherever you are, or if it's sold online. As long as you can get the serial number up, you can look up that serial number and it'll tell you exactly when it was manufactured. So a simple serial number search is the most reliable way. Uh, another another telltale that a lot of people use, although it's not 100% accurate, is on the bottom of the lever back here and the mechanism, there's a set screw. And a lot of people say that if it's got that set screw, you have a pre-64. But that's only partly the truth. Because yes, that set screw went away in 1964, but when Moroku started building these rifles again, they brought that set screw back. So you can't use that as a 100% telltale, because when Moroku started manufacturing the Winchester Model 94, they were really focusing on building it like it was originally built as much as they possibly could. They couldn't get rid of things like the tang safety and things like that, but they did bring that set screw back, which incidentally, if it has that set screw and it's got the tang safety on it, you know for a fact it is not a pre-64 rifle. So the screw on the bottom of the lever mechanism is not a fail-safe. Now the other telltale is on the right side of the receiver here. Right here, there's two screws. And those screws are for the spring door, for the loading gate, and for the carrier. Now, if it's a pre-64 rifle, and this so far has been pretty accurate as far as I can tell, if it's a pre-64 rifle, those two screws are going to be inset into the receiver diagonally. They're going to be kind of, if you drew a line in between the two screws, they're going to make a diagonal line. If they're post-64, those two screws are set one right on top of the other. And that's a pretty good telltale to tell you if it is or is not a pre-64, is how those two screws on the side of the receiver are set. But again, the most reliable way is to go ahead and just do a serial number search. A quick Google search for Model 94 serial number lookup, and it'll bring you to a couple of different websites. Like I said, I'll post the link to one of them in the description down below. So we all know that the Winchester Model 94 is a pretty iconic sporting rifle. And I tell you what, this rifle has put a lot of deer in the freezer. But has the military ever used the Model 94 Winchester? Well, yes, actually it has. In World War I, 1,800 of the Model 94 Winchesters, and they were serial numbers 835-800 to 852-500. and they were all stamped with the flaming bomb that indicates military usage. 1,800 of those rifles were purchased for the U.S. Army, and those rifles were used to protect timber stands in the Pacific Northwest uh, that were used, the wood was used for producing combat aircraft. So they wanted to protect those stands of timber. And that unit was actually a portion of the U.S. Army Signal Corps, and they were called the spruce squadrons because the trees that they were protecting were spruce trees, and that was the wood that was primarily used in aircraft. All those rifles were chambered in 30-30 due to the 30-30 cartridge's renowned reputation for operating in dense forests, which is also one of the reasons it became such a popular sporting cartridge. Additionally, the United Kingdom bought 5,000 Winchester Model 94s to be issued to their soldiers, as well as 15,000 rifles that were purchased by France and Belgium. Now, those rifles were often used for job duties like motorcycle carriers, balloon units, railway personnel, things of that effect. All the military uses for the Model 94 were geared towards rear echelon duties in World War One. Messengers, transport personnel, aircraft ground crews, things of that effect. Then in World War II, Canada bought a bunch of these Winchester Model 94s for Canada's Pacific Coast Militia Rangers, and they were issued these rifles as their service rifles to repel a possible Japanese attack if the Japanese were ever to attack the west coast of Canada. So, did the Winchester Model 94 have any shortcomings or have any problems? Well, nothing is perfect, and the Model 94 is no different. And one of the very big shortcomings of the Model 94, and it's not really a shortcoming of the design, it was more of a shortcoming of the time and the age and when the rifle was built, was the tube loading magazine. Uh, Tube loading magazines require you to use round nose or flat tip soft pointed bullets. And that was because when you stack rounds into the tube, the magazine tube, one in front of the other, if you had pointed or spire point bullets, the actual action of maybe dropping the rifle or even just firing the rifle could cause the point of the bullet to ignite the primer of the cartridge in front of you. And then you would have a chain reaction fire inside of your tube magazine, which is not a good thing. Those flat nose bullets, usually flat nose and round nose bullets, usually lended poorly to good ballistics. They just didn't go very fast, and they seemed to drop fairly quickly over distance. But again, is that really a problem? No, when you consider the fact that most white-tailed deer are taken inside of a range of 100 yards, and most game animals, for that matter, are taken inside of a range of 100 yards, really isn't that big of a deal. Poor ballistics. But Hornady Lever Revolution rounds, however, seem to have solved that problem. You can buy 30-30 Winchester ammunition made by Hornady Lever Revolution. They've got a pointed bullet, but the tip of the bullet is a soft polymer plastic that will not allow the tip of the bullet behind to ignite the primer of the bullet in front. So they have seemed to have solved that problem. I've heard claims of the 30-30 Winchester in Lever Revolution ammunition coming very close to ballistic capabilities of the 308. I don't know that I necessarily believe that. I would have to try it and see some data myself, but it has helped considerably. Another issue with the 30-30 Winchester was top ejection. And that was the same issue that the Model 92 Winchester also had, was top ejection. The shell, the extractor in the ejector, causes the shell to come straight out the top of the gun. And by pure accident, really, the brim of a cowboy hat did a really good job of letting those shells roll off of your hat and not ending up down your shirt or bouncing off your nose or forehead or things like that. And so that was kind of a complaint that a lot of people had. The other problem with top ejection is you can't mount optics to it. I shouldn't say can't. It's hard. It's inherently difficult because the shell wants to come straight out the top. It would hit the scope. Now, there were some companies that made a side or a canted scope mount, which actually kind of set the scope off to the left side of the receiver. And though they did work, they weren't ideal because now the scope is not lined up with the bore of the barrel, and it just made sighting very, very difficult. It just wasn't a great ideal system. So typically, if you see a Model 94 Winchester that was made when it was top ejection, they all pretty much just have iron sights. Now, that was something that was fixed later. Later models of the Winchester 94 have got a little bit of a cutout on the side of the receiver here, and they actually kind of eject the shells off to the side diagonally, if you will. And those guns are actually tapped and drilled on the top for scopes. There's a tap and drill on the front of the barrel boss right here, where the barrel screws into the receiver for a scope mount, and then on either side of the bolt there's a screw hole that is made specifically for using a specified mount to mount a scope on top of a Winchester Model 94. Again, that didn't come till later, and it must be a side eject to get that to happen, but they did fix the problem later on. Regardless of its shortcomings or its history or any of the problems that the Winchester Model 94 had, I would say it's pretty safe to say that the legacy of the Model 94 Winchester has pretty much etched itself into the annals of time. And I don't think the gun will ever have a successor, at least not in the lever action repeating rifle category. Now, yeah, AR-15s have sold millions and millions of guns. I'm not going to argue that point with you. But when it comes to lever action rifles, I don't think that the Model 94 is ever going to have a successor. With that, let's go ahead and wrap this video up. Now, if you're liking these kind of videos, please do me the huge solid of going down and hitting that like and subscribe button. Ring that notification bell so you get notified of upcoming videos. And tell me in those comments if you like these kind of videos so I can continue to do more of them. As always, I want to thank my longtime subscribers, everybody who watches these channels. I really do appreciate you, and I really do appreciate your support. This is Ed with Jack of All Trades. As always, thanks for stopping by, and we'll see you on the next video.